What a crazy 24 hours it has been in UFO world. We have just had Hal Puthoff on the Joe Rogan show talking about remote viewing an alien base in my country, Australia, at a place called Mount Zeil. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. But we've also had Eric Davis telling Representative Eric Burleson about 4 known alien species, such as reptilians and insectoids, in front of a live audience and a live stream going out to thousands, likely hundreds of thousands of people. And in the very same briefing, Lou Elizondo was showing people pictures of cornfields and talking about motherships again. We're going to be looking at 2 of those clips today, but I think Lou's effort is, I think that lands him in place, the headline slot on Weird Week this week. So that'll be coming out tomorrow. But I've also got another clip to show you today, and a very good friend of mine who shared on my podcast, actually, for those of you who have watched the channel for a long time, you might remember, Rhys shared his close family member's experience with a strange light and abduction in the Mount Zeil area. This is a while ago, but we're going to look at the clip today. We're going to be going deeper on Mount Zeil today than we have before, because we have looked at it a couple of times, and we're going to watch a couple of clips first so you guys can get some context, because the stories, they hit harder when they make more sense and when you understand it properly. You know, you got to finish school before you go to university. You know what I'm saying? By the way, my name is Josh. Welcome to Polarity. This channel is about digging into questions like, are we alone? How did we get here? Is reality a simulation or a construct of our consciousness? You know, all the things that nobody apparently cares about. But if you're not one of those people, you should subscribe, because hopefully one day we will answer those questions together. So before we get into the first clip, which is Hal Puthoff, I just want to give anyone who's maybe new to this topic or maybe just doesn't know, just a quick overview on who Hal Puthoff is. So he's an expert in theoretical physics, consciousness studies, and government-sanctioned UAP and psychic research. He has a PhD in electrical engineering, which he got at Stanford University. He's a former NSA and CIA contractor. That's a big one. Co-founder of the Stanford Research Institute's remote viewing program, a key figure in the CIA's Stargate project, where they studied ESP and psychic phenomena. He's also a specialist in zero-point energy and advanced propulsion, a former contractor for DIA's ORSAP and ATIP UAP research program, and the co-founder of To the Stars Academy. That's a very big list with a lot of 3-letter acronyms, but I think that's important before we watch this clip.
One of our remote viewers that was really good came up one day and said, I was looking around and I think I found a UFO base on Earth. This is during the remote viewing era, and you know, oh my God, I've got to report this to my CIA contract monitor. And do I want to tell him that? And so I did. And one of the places he came up with but one of the places he came up with was Mount Zeil in Australia. And so my CIA contract monitor says, well, I know the station keeper, CIA station keeper out in Australia. I think I'll call him, and I won't tell him why I'm asking, but I'll ask him about Mount Zeil area. So he gave him a call, and he said, I'd like to ask you about that Mount Zeil area. He says, oh, you mean where the UFOs are always flying around?
Whoa.
So I thought, oh, gee, you know.
So there you go. That's Hal Puthoff referring specifically to Pat Price, but he wasn't the only one, and we're going to get into that later. But I actually dug sort of deeply into not only Mount Zeil, but the area that surrounds it, which includes Pine Gap in that video. So I'll leave a link to that in the description if you want to go and check that one out as well, because the history and the lore around Central Australia, where people just think nobody is crazy. There's definitely nothing going on there, that's for sure. Now, as I said earlier, OG viewers of my channel will remember this amazing interview that I did with Rhys Dalton-Morgan, where we spoke about his grandfather, who ran Woomera Test Range, which again is another part of Australia's crazy history, which gets touched on in that video as well. But he also went into detail for the very first time about an abduction experience that his own mother had when she was younger, right near Mount Zeil. I'll let Rhys tell the story.
But this is obviously where things escalate a little bit. Now, she moved to Australia and was living in Uluru That's where she met my father. He used to be the
What brought her to Australia? To
I think
Uluru specifically?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, she was just traveling, I believe, originally. Probably just wanted to explore and get out and see Australia as, kind of a wild country. So, yeah, she came down and ventured around and ended up, I think, working out at Uluru for a little bit. And that's where she met my father, who was a park ranger out there working at the time. But prior to meeting him, interestingly, she said she had this very real and terrifying experience out at Yalara, which is sort of like an area just outside of Uluru. And she was staying at almost a portable home there. She said she'd been watching the stars at night and was just sort of like, she liked to stargaze, right? And she said she went back into her home to go, back into her room to go to bed after being out there, and then jumped into bed. And then she said she heard like a low pitch humming sound, or like a strange vibrational auditory sound. And it seemed to be coming closer. And her description was that a bright light appeared to come close to her bedroom window, where the light sort of shone in the sense like a truck shining its light into the bedroom. So she, kind of was trying to examine this light, and then the light moved around to the other side of the portable home. And meanwhile, she's, trying to figure out if there's a car, truck, whatever it is, right, out the window. And then basically the light's on the other side, but she can still hear this loud sort of vibrational auditory sound. And the light then comes back around to the window, and she climbed back into her bed in that time and was obviously full of fear, she described. And then she said...
So she's seeing kind of her room and her inside her house illuminated, like the interior is illuminated by
through
this
the
light
window
source.
When she was in her bed at first, with this bright white light. Very bright, like her description, right? And this sound that accompanied it, and got up to investigate, and had gone around the other side, and then, jumped back into her bed. And then the light came back around in. And then her description was that she felt as if she was paralyzed all of a sudden, that she could only move her eyes, and that she was there in bed, and she could only move her eyes around. And then all of a sudden, she said she felt the fear of, like, ultimate fear was her description, and the presence of some sort. She couldn't see anything, but she said she felt a presence. And then she said she blacked out, and she woke up in the morning, the next morning, like in bed, tucked in. And her description was that she felt as if she'd been under heavy anesthetic, and she
just really groggy.
She couldn't go to work. Yeah, she had to call in. Yeah.
Any sort of physical signs after that, or
nothing that I could confirm with her. And in all honesty, like I said, my mum's quite a private person. She gave me permission to discuss and talk about this, obviously. And it's something I think she hasn't been that willing to explore, from what I can kind of gather. I think she's quite, scared of the experience, and maybe understanding more as to what it is or what happened. But, clearly I've obviously done a lot of deep diving into the readings of experiences and so forth. And, we've looked a little bit into her past as well, from when she was young, and seeing if there's any kind of correlations with whatever this was. And, I think there's a possibility that, she could be definitely, an experiencer.
Now, what you didn't hear before that clip was actually Rhys's mother's third encounter in her life. These had started since she was a child, and he went into that in the story. And interestingly enough, she now works at Australia's only nuclear facility. Is there a connection there? I don't know. But if you want the full story on that one, I'll leave a link to that podcast in the description. Rhys Dalton-Morgan is a great bloke. Consider him a good friend of mine now. A fantastic researcher as well, especially with Australia's connection to the phenomenon. So I highly recommend you check out his channel. I'll also link his channel in the description as well. Now, as you can see, again, the proximity of Yalara to not only Mount Zeil, but also Pine Gap is crazy. Not only is this area a hotspot for UAP, as we found out investigating in that Pine Gap video, but it's also of huge cultural and spiritual significance to the Aboriginal people of Australia and their stories of the Dreamtime, which are absolutely fascinating the more you dig into them, and the kind of parallels that you can draw between the way the Indigenous speak about the Dreamtime and these Dreamtime creatures, and then you look at the UFO phenomenon and you realize they're very, very similar. Now, just before we dig into Mount Zeil properly, we have one more short clip to watch. This is Eric Davis 24 hours ago speaking to a live audience and a live stream, again, at a UAP briefing to Representative Eric Burleson, who, remember, is now advised by David Grush. Now, just before we play it again, for anyone who is new or just maybe doesn't know, I'll give you a little breakdown on who Eric Davis is. So he is known for applying advanced physics to reverse engineer or understand potential non-human technologies, and has held a level 9 top secret sensitive compartmentalized information clearance. So that's a TSSCI clearance at level 9. I don't know how many levels there are, but 9 is already a lot. He also has a PhD in astrophysics from the University of Arizona. He's a senior research physicist at Earth Tech International with Hal Puthoff, author of 38 government-funded studies on exotic propulsion and UAPs under ORSAP, contributor to the famous Wilson Davis memo, which alleges a briefing on hidden UAP crash retrieval programs, specialist in wormholes, warp drives, and advanced theoretical physics, and a consultant to the US government on UFO technologies and anomalous phenomena.
They're typically the multi-species people, really, like the Greys, the Nordics. People have talked about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian or insectoid, it's that they resemble to the recipient of reptile or an insect type humanoid, because they have this head and 4 limbs and torso.
So large, small,
Human size, human scale.
and are there how many are accrued?
Well, the Greys I'm familiar with from investigating the crash at Corona, which is misnamed the crash at Roswell. It's not the crash at Roswell, it's the crash at Corona, Mexico. Those were Greys, those were both tall. And the Nordics are typically human-sized, probably, I've heard 5-6 feet tall. And same with the people who mislabel reptilian and insectoid, they're roughly that top height too. I haven't heard anything about anything 7 or 8 feet away.
So that's a little clip from the briefing yesterday. I tried to break all of them up into their speakers and fix the audio because the audio was horrendous. I know, believe it or not, that's actually far better than what the original live stream was, which is just crazy that they couldn't work that out. But that's also on the channel. I made a playlist with all the speakers on the channel, so go and check that out if you want to take a listen. But is it a coincidence that on the literal same day, Hal Puthoff, who worked with Eric Davis, drops knowledge of an alien species being remote viewed inside a subterranean facility in Australia, and Eric Davis talks about 4 known alien species existing on the planet? Honestly, yes, it probably is a coincidence, but it's also extremely interesting. And as Matthew Brown said earlier this week, if you hear these kind of things and are just uninterested, you are systematically a boring person. I love that. Now, the following information on what we're about to get into in Mount Zeil is pulled from multiple sources that I would certainly not consider to be scholarly sources, okay? However, given what we have just heard from Eric Davis, from Hal Puthoff, from Rhys Dalton-Morgan, I think we should take a moment to just kind of check ourselves and where we draw our line on what's too hard to believe. Because when we hear words like Draco reptilians and Anunnaki, let's remember that people who are holding very high clearances are taking these things very seriously. And as silly as it might sound to you and to me, and as reality shattering as it might be for some people, these are very high level people who seem to be comfortable with that idea. Okay, I just listed to you all the degrees and accolades of people like Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis. Now, whatever you think about them personally, to be holding those kind of degrees and credentials and take this thing very seriously whether you think it's a psyop or not, I think we should also still listen, because the people who are listening have a lot of push and pull on this subject. At the end of the day, we've generally accepted that remote viewing is real, right? The CIA wouldn't be funding fairy tales for over 50 years. Eric Davis didn't find his physics degree and his TSSCI clearance in the bottom of his cornflakes either, okay? So if you're prepared to believe one part of what they have to say, don't let your mind start to panic and batten down the hatches to protect your mold of reality when it hears a strong wind coming. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. Let's just suspend belief for a moment. Let's take this all in with a pinch of salt, as we always should, and we'll see how we feel after. So, let's get into the big picture. Mount Zeil, or Ulathaki, I'll always attempt the indigenous names, but I may butcher them, and I'm sorry, is at the center of multiple remote viewing claims and ET-based allegations. It's got several CIA-linked remote viewers, which we're going to look at, who have consistently identified it as one of 4 main underground bases on Earth, and we're going to talk about the other ones quickly as well. Now, the big claims are, from these remote viewers, that within this subterranean facility includes the presence of Greys, Anunnaki, humanoids, and human collaboration. This is believed to be connected to Pine Gap and possibly involved in interdimensional or space-based energy transmissions. It's also rumored to be a sister facility of Pine Gap. And if we are to believe that train of thinking, sorry, just fixing something with my camera. If we're to believe that train of thinking, that this is a sister facility, then people have also alleged that Pine Gap was built to mirror the facility at Mount Zeil, because I'm sure we could assume that Mount Zeil was obviously there first, if this is all real, of course. Next, the cultural and Aboriginal significance. Known as Ulathaki by the Arunta people, part of Apanranya dreaming story with sacred caterpillar totems are said to originate from it. So this is basically some, I don't have it in the slides, but iconography from the indigenous people of the area. Mount Zeil is a big part of their story. It features in indigenous ceremony, storytelling, and spiritual life. A unique artifact, the Chiringa stone, references a possum totem at the summit, showing deep cultural meaning. So again, this is all part of the indigenous story. Mount Zeil has a very big part to play. Then we've got some of the evidence from the remote viewers. Now, Pat Price, who you can see there with Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, probably sometime in the 70s or 80s. I know it must have been the 70s. Pat Price identified 4 alien bases around the world. So they were Mount Hayes in Alaska, Mount Perdido in Spain, and Mount Inyagani in Zimbabwe, and of course Mount Zeil in Australia. But what's interesting is that they said Mount Zeil had the most personnel and acted as a Homo sapien introduction point. Now, I don't know what that could mean. Leave your guesses in the comments. Observed advanced BTL implants and use of thought-based control, and claimed he was detected during a session and misled them to Melbourne as a distraction. So this is basically, if you go to the video that I linked earlier, I spoke about that in a little more depth, that when he was there, he felt like he was being kind of led in a different direction and back to Melbourne. Next slide. These claims were not just from Pat Price. They were then corroborated about 10 years later under Skip Atwater and the whole Project Stargate remote viewing program. So Joe McMoneagle, when tasked to remote view Mount Zeil, described a black doorway and a concrete dome on Mount Zeil's western edge. This is the drawing that he made. He said he saw electronics, coils, and control centers underground, and felt a sinister but dormant presence like a snake inside a box. We've then got Lynn Buchanan, who we don't really hear much about, but he is arguably one of the OGs. From what I understand, this guy was like the coach. This guy trained a lot of these big remote viewers. And he also viewed all 4 of these bases. He's called Mount Zeil an ET entry and exit point, and that it was populated by Greys and humans. So this is corroborating evidence. He wasn't retasked, so the detail is limited, but he saw humans and non-humans working side by side. And I think it's important to just mention with that as well, that like, if you don't know much about remote viewing, the way this stuff works is all they're given is coordinates. They don't get told what they're trying to find, what they're looking for, anything about what it looks like. It's just numbers. So these are meant to be like double-blind experiments here. We've then got the public disclosure and government denial. So documents from Project Stargate were declassified, revealing many of these sessions. And that's what, if we just go back a little bit here, that's what you can find in that book there. The Pat Price 1972 remote viewing papers details a lot of this, but there are a lot of documents on the CIA website about this kind of stuff. Also, Skip Atwater, ex-US Army intelligence, confirmed the 4 bases at a UFO conference. He was also on the Sean Ryan show. So there's like a whole 2.5 hour podcast with Skip Atwater. I don't think they mentioned Mount Zeil specifically in that podcast, but it's interesting nonetheless in the realm of remote viewing. And this one's interesting. An NSA contact, codenamed X3, claimed Zeil was an Anunnaki stronghold tied to Pine Gap with hybrid programs. So this is information coming from an anonymous whistleblower, essentially. Again, like I said, all this information is pulled from non-scholarly sources, but given the information we've just heard from Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff, I think it's worth throwing in there and considering. Some whistleblowers suggest global elite cooperation with ET racers in underground bases. So again, this is just kind of affirming what we've already heard. Stephen Greer's recent disclosure book that he's selling on every podcast includes a little section about this, talking about the Greys being programmed life forms, collaborating with Pine Gap. I went through that in the other video, so make sure you check that one out as well. Now, interestingly, more recently in 2024, remote viewer John Vivanco attempted to remote view Zeil because of all the stuff that's come out through the Project Stargate. And he said he was blocked. He said that basically there was just like something that just stopped him from being able to see anything in that area. And he suggested that there were countermeasures in place to stop him. And essentially, since all this Project Stargate stuff, there's been no real hard evidence or intel that's been received. Now, I will say as well on that, apparently Ross Coulthart has said that he went to Mount Zeil and didn't say anything. Didn't see anything. And people online, I've seen people online saying things like, oh, Ross Coulthart went there and there's nothing there. So case closed. It's all a hoax. I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, it's great that Ross went there. It's interesting that he didn't see anything. I don't think the aliens are going to be having a barbecue up on the top of Mount Zeil. That's probably not the way it works. So I don't think that's necessarily a cause for people to dismiss all of this. Again, I'm not saying it's all real, but just because Ross Coulthart went for a hike around Mount Zeil and didn't see anything, that doesn't mean we should put this case to bed. Now, I think that pretty much wraps it up, guys. Look, Weird Week this week will be around this time tomorrow, okay? We're going to be doing it earlier. We're going to show some love to the West Coasters because they've kind of been getting shafted the last couple of weeks. So that's going to be at 11:30 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, 9:30 if you're on the East Coast, 6:30 p.m. if you're on the West Coast on Saturday night. But man, this is all very fascinating. Mount Zeil is actually 1,500 kilometers from my house, which is about 930 miles. And I won't lie, there have been a few ideas thrown around between Rhys and I to go out and take a look at Woomera, which isn't too far away from Pine Gap and Mount Zeil. So I don't know, maybe we should add another stop to that trip. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Are there aliens in the outback? Is reality stranger than fiction? The way I see it, I can't sit here and accept all of the CIA remote viewing stuff and then suddenly draw the line at one part that just disrupts my idea of reality. You can't cherry pick things based on what you like and what you don't like. Weird Week's earlier this week. Make sure you're there. Be good, be kind, get outside, touch some grass, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on?
No matter how far you go into the dark, when you flip, you go exactly the same place to the light. In our galaxy. Everything. Because because everything is in balance. Everything is a polarity.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is.